This video is made possible by donations to the United States Lighthouse Society from people like you.
You are listening to Lighthearted, the official podcast of the United States Lighthouse Society. I'm Jeremy D'Entremont. Welcome. My co-host today is Michelle Jewel Shaw, chairperson of Friends of Portsmouth Harbor Lighthouses. Hi, Michelle.
Hi, Jeremy, and hello to all of our listeners out there.
Today is August 27th, 2022, and this is episode 188 of Lighthearted. In a few minutes, we're going to hear an interview with Anna Crowley Redding, who's written a wonderful new children's book about a 19th century lighthouse heroine. There it is. Happen to have a copy right here. So that's going to be a lot of fun. And this is a very special episode because this is the first time in the history of this podcast, which started more than 3 years ago, done about 200 episodes. This is the first time we're actually doing a video version of this episode along with an audio version. So I want to welcome everyone who's listening, all our regular listeners, new listeners, and also everybody who's watching this episode on the U.S. Lighthouse Society's YouTube channel. And at this point, let me do something that I was thinking about. You see the background I have here. This is from my recent trip to England for the month of July. As you know, Michelle, first I was in England for a week, and then I was in Ireland for a little more than 3 weeks with the U.S. Lighthouse Society tour. The picture behind me right now, I know our listeners don't know what I'm talking about, but people who are watching can see the background I have, which is the Folkestone Lighthouse, Folkstone, Folkestone Lighthouse on the southeast coast of England, which is privately owned and has been converted into a champagne bar, which is pretty interesting. Yeah. Unfortunately, when I was there with my friends Jeremy and Babs Hawes, it was closed. So we weren't able to have any champagne there, but it's a beautiful setting. There's a lot of restaurants nearby and stuff. So I thought I'd throw that up there as an interesting background to start out here, but I'm going to take that background off so people can get the thrill of seeing my actual little study. Let me see here. Here we go. And there it is. What a thrill, huh?
It looks very well kept.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. It's neater than it usually is because I knew I was going to be doing this today. So, but what you see is pretty much my entire study office. It's not real big, but it does the job. And I've put many hours of work in this place. I lived here for over 20 years now, here in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. So anyway, I've thought a long time about doing video versions of some of the episodes of the podcast. And a couple of people actually on the Ireland tour, 2 different people talked to me about it. They said, nothing personal, but I don't listen to the podcast because I need something visual. And I understand that completely. To be honest, I don't listen to a lot of podcasts. I prefer watching things, so I understand that completely. So that's something I thought about, but it's kind of prompted me to move forward with doing video versions of some of the podcast episodes. We won't do it every week, but I'll do it as often as possible. So what do you think, Michelle? Do you like doing a video version?
I like it. I think it'll be, a great addition. Maybe not doing all of them this way, but I think it'll be great for people to be able to put a face to the voice.
Yeah. I know some people like to multitask. They like to listen to podcasts while they do other things. But for other people, they just want to sit at a computer. It helps to have something visual. And it'll enable me to put things on the screen. Like when I interview somebody, I can put on stills and things that kind of illustrate what they're talking about. So I'll be doing some of that too. So I'm excited about it. I think it'll work out well. And again, we'll do it often, but certainly not every week. So we're starting to get late into the season at Portsmouth Harbor Lighthouse, our beautiful local lighthouse here on the New Hampshire seacoast. So how are you feeling about the tour season so far, Michelle?
I'm very happy with the tour season. It's been going great again with the scheduled private tours that we've been doing by advance reservation, and I
Hmm.
really enjoy doing it. We have more time with visitors and they get to know us a little bit and they really enjoy it as well.
So I want to say something about what's happening this Saturday. Okay, but I'm talking about we're recording on August, stay the 18th. Michelle,
I
is
think
that
so.
correct? I think
I think
so.
so.
Yeah, it's hard to keep track. But in a couple of days on Saturday is the International Lighthouse and Lightship Weekend. So when people hear this, that'll actually be past. But I will be at Portsmouth Harbor Lighthouse with a group of amateur radio operators, or ham radio operators as they're known. Um, and people will be at lighthouses all over the world broadcasting from lighthouses and lightships, International Lighthouse and Lightship Weekend. So I've known about this for a long time, but I've never actually been around it when it was going on. So I hope to interview some of those people for the podcast as they're talking to lighthouses and lightships all over the world, and maybe hear some of those conversations as well. So that
It sounds
that
pretty
should be
cool.
fun. Yeah, yeah. It's a unique idea, I think, and I'm looking forward to it. So before we get to today's interview, Michelle, and I also want to say, as far as the video versions, part of my thinking about this too is that and that's in general with the audio versions of the podcast as well, trying to get away from having everything tightly scripted. I think it's nice when we get to chat a little bit. Early on in the podcast, I was pretty much scripting everything, but I
Yeah.
think after 200 episodes, we can wing it a little bit.
We can go off the cuff a little bit.
Yeah, but at this point, you are going to need to look at the script, because I'm wondering if anything interesting has happened on this state lighthouse history.
As a matter of fact, it has, Jeremy. Cockspur Lighthouse near Savannah, Georgia, was struck by a massive storm on August 27th, 1881. The storm surge filled the lighthouse interior and destroyed the keeper's house. 12 years later, two lighthouse keepers and two caretakers from nearby Fort Pulaski took refuge inside a stairway in the fort when the Great Hurricane of 1893 struck.
I visited Cockspur Lighthouse last November with Joel Kadoff of the Fort Pulaski National Monument, and interviewed him for the podcast, did a little video that's on the USLHS YouTube channel about it. And they were restoring the lighthouse at that time. There was scaffolding around it. I got to climb the scaffolding up the side of the tower, which was
Oh, that
pretty
must have
cool.
been interesting.
It was interesting. When you go up the top of the stairs in that lighthouse, there's no ladder from the watch room below the lantern up into the lantern. So there's ordinarily no way to there's no active light anymore there. But anyway, because I got to climb up the scaffolding, I got to go get up to the lantern level, because otherwise there's no way
Oh,
to do that. So,
yep.
so that was fun. So I think it's time we should move on to today's interview. So can you help me tell people about our guests today, Michelle?
Sure. Courage Like Kate, The True Story of a Girl Lighthouse Keeper, is a new children's picture book biography based on the life of Kate Moore, a lighthouse keeper in the 19th century at Fayerweather Island in Bridgeport, Connecticut. The book is written by Anna Crowley Redding and beautifully illustrated by Emily Sutton.
Yeah, I'll
This
just
is
show
actually
it.
a book that I think I'm going to add to my school library for
Oh, good.
my kiddos to read. So,
Yeah. Well, I just love that cover. I think it's kind of a masterpiece.
it's beautiful.
It is, isn't it? And since you mention it, Michelle, I'll just cut in here for a moment just to congratulate you on your new teaching job, which you're just starting, and your picture has frozen. Whoop, there you are. Okay.
My cat climbed on the computer.
Uh-oh. Well, stuff happens. That's what happens when you do a
That's
video
what
version
happens
of the
when you go
podcast.
live, right, Jeremy?
Yeah. Well, we're not quite live,
No,
but sort of. So as I was saying, you're just starting a new teaching position at
I am going to be a special ed case manager for eighth graders at Rochester Middle School.
that is so fantastic. So I know you've worked really hard to get to that
I
point.
have.
Hey, congratulations in your new position. You're just starting, just about to start for the year,
Just
right?
about to start. Yeah, next week I have new teacher orientation and all kinds of things happening next
Mm-hmm.
week. And we start the last week of August. So
Yeah. Fantastic. It's so great. So Congratulations. So getting back to our guest, Anna Crowley Redding. Anna has wanted to be a writer since elementary school. When she wasn't writing, she was busy asking people lots of questions. This tendency led Anna to become an investigative TV reporter, and she received multiple Edward R. Murrow Awards and an Emmy Award and was recognized by the Associated Press.
Anna's debut young adult nonfiction book, Google It, A History of Google, explored the extraordinary tale of the startup of one of the world's most innovative companies. Her other books include Elon Musk, A Mission to Save the World, and Black Hole Chasers, the amazing true story of an astronomical breakthrough. She's written several picture books for children, including Rescuing the Declaration of Independence, Chowder Rules, The True Story of an Epic Food Fight, and The Gravity Tree.
Anna's work has been published in 3 languages. She and her 2 boys live near Portland, Maine. Courage Like Kate has just been released. I think August 16th, I believe, was the official release date by Random House Studio. I had the pleasure of speaking with Anna recently, so let's listen to that conversation now. I am speaking today with Anna Crowley Redding, who is the author of this wonderful new children's book I just happen to have next to me here, Courage Like Kate, the true story of a girl lighthouse keeper, which I really, really love. And I want to thank you so much for joining me today, Anna. I really appreciate it.
I am so excited to be here with you. And I know that you are a lighthouse expert and love lighthouses. So I feel like I'm in great company.
Well, I guess if you've been doing lighthouse stuff as long as I have, somebody will say you're an expert, and I've been doing it for like 40 years. So I appreciate you saying
Yeah,
that.
I think you qualify.
Well, thank you so much, and congratulations to you and Emily Sutton, the illustrator, on this new book.
Thank you.
It's a beautiful book, and besides being an inspirational true story, it includes a lot of detail about lighthouse keeping in the 19th century, and of course, I really appreciate that fact. I was wondering, were lighthouses something that you were interested in before you started this project?
I think there's something that I'd always sort of had this romantic idea about, and who doesn't, when you're traveling along the coast and you see a lighthouse, you want to go and see it up close. And even better if it's still functioning and you can see it at night. There is something romantic about it. I think it's the heroism involved, the guiding ships to safety, the sort of loneliness of it. There's just something about it that's magnetic. Now, that said, I wasn't specifically researching lighthouses and then stumbled onto Kate's story. The way that I stumbled onto Kate's story is that, I had been a reporter, and, reporters have this habit of, checking the wires all the time back in the day when they were called wires.
Yeah.
And so as smartphones have come on the scene, I still do that by checking news apps all the time. And so it was like the middle of the night, I couldn't sleep, and I was reading news apps, and I saw this news flash that the U.S. Coast Guard had named a fast response Coast Guard cutter after Kate Moore, and that she had been a lighthouse keeper who started keeping the lighthouse at age 12 in the 1800s. And I was just thinking to myself, oh my gosh, if I had known this story when I was 12 years old, what possibilities might I have imagined for myself as a girl, as a woman? And so that's really what sort of drew me in.
Yeah, oh, that all makes a lot of sense. And before we continue, I just want to mention, I want to thank you for allowing this to be both an audio and video episode of the podcast. I meant to thank you for that.
Oh, my pleasure.
Things are a little different because in the past, whenever I've done any video like Zoom events and things like that for the U.S. Lighthouse Society, I always use fake backgrounds like I'm at a lighthouse or something. People I think the very first time are getting to see my messy little study here. So that's for some people, maybe that's I don't know if it's a thrill exactly, but I'm not trying to make excuses
messy
or anything. Well,
it doesn't look messy. It looks
thank
busy.
you. I strained it out a little bit for this, I have to admit. So before we talk more about the book, I want to touch a little bit on your career before you became an author. And you just mentioned that you're a reporter, of course. But I believe you went to Northeastern University in Boston. Is that right?
I did. Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
I participated in their co-op program. And my first job in journalism was at New England Cable News. I
Hmm.
was working under Tom Ellis, who was amazing, who passed away not too long ago, but he was a terrific mentor, really involved in teaching you. And so that's kind of where I started. And then went to upstate New York, to Utica,
Hmm.
New York for my first on-air job, then Syracuse, and then Charlotte, North Carolina. And in Syracuse is really where I fell in love with investigative reporting and was trained in that and learned how to really dig through documents to find a story. And that was sort of what my main job was in Charlotte. And it's part of what I still love to do in writing about true stories for young readers.
Hmm. Yeah. We have a couple of things in common. First of all, I went to Emerson College in Boston.
Oh yeah, I
I've had-
took a class at Emerson with Rex Trailer. So
Oh, wow. Yeah, he was teaching
yeah.
when I was there. I had a little contact with him, but I did not. His classes were always so solidly booked. There was a waiting list, and
Oh
I never
yeah.
actually took one of his. I majored in film, and he was teaching TV production, but I never got
Yes.
in one of his classes. For people in the Boston area who are listening or watching might remember Rex Trailer was the host of the kids show Boomtown.
Yep.
Yeah, he was quite a local personality. But anyway, so I went
And
to Emerson.
he was a
Yeah.
terrific on camera coach too, which is
Uh-huh.
Northeastern had like major big J journalism chops, but they were sort of disinterested at the time in on camera performance. And the reality is, if you're going to be on television, you've got to be able to do both. So
Yeah.
I was picking up that class with Rex Trailer so I could learn from him exactly, how to do it on camera.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you had some good mentors for sure in your
Yeah.
early career. And I'm glad you mentioned Tom Ellis. Of course, being living in the Boston area for most of my life and being in Portsmouth, New Hampshire now, I've watched NECN, New England Cable News, a lot over the
Mm-hmm.
years. And I was going to say I grew up watching Tom Ellis. He probably came along when I was a teenager. So I spent a lot of my life seeing Tom Ellis on various Boston news channels. And I saw your blog entry where you talked about how important he was in your life. Could you just want to say just a little bit more about that? It was really kind of a touching blog entry you did on that.
He was just so encouraging and he was hands on. So, for people who don't know, he was like the big star. I think he worked at all of the networks in Boston at one point, and he worked
Yeah.
in New York, which in broadcast news is the number one market. So, if you make it to New York, I mean, you've hit the big time.
Yeah.
And yet he was so willing to share his time and expertise and knowledge. And so he taught me a lot. And one of the things that he taught me was, if you're feeling nervous before you do something, don't let that intimidate you. Don't let that be a message of you're not good enough or you're not there yet. In fact, if you're feeling nervous, it's because you're about to do some of your very best work. And I have thought about that in just about every single time that I feel nervous. I think about what he said, and it's really helped me reach for things that normally maybe I would have reacted to that and said, you know what, that doesn't feel right. I'm not going to do that yet.
Mm-hmm.
And his advice really helped me to sort of blast through that wall. And, as I began writing for young readers, I realized at first I thought, what is the big deal? I've been writing for a long time for TV news. Like it can't be that difficult. And anyone who's written books for kids is dying laughing right now because it is that difficult and more.
Yeah.
And which I had to learn the hard way. And then you're sending your work out and you're getting rejection after rejection after rejection. And I sent Tom an email and said, I'm trying to do this thing. I'm trying to become a children's author. I've always wanted to do it since I was a little girl, but it's just like rejection city, population Anna. And he sent me this email back that more or less said, my dear Anna, is there anything that you have dreamed of that you've worked hard at and not accomplished?
Mm-hmm.
And you can do this too. And it was just exactly what I needed to hear from a person I trusted and knew believed in me.
Mm-hmm.
And it kept me going so that I didn't quit and I didn't give up. And Courage Like Kate is my 7th published book.
Mm-hmm.
So I appreciate his influence in my life so much. And it reminds me, to really take the time to be that present for other people who are, on this journey as well, in a different spot of how can I help them? How can I support them? How can I encourage them? Because if not for him, I probably would have quit.
Yeah. Well, I love hearing all of that. It's so great to hear he was such a supportive person. And anybody who has lived in the Boston area in the last maybe 50-ish years certainly remembers Tom Ellis. He was, like you
Yeah.
said, he was like the dean of Boston news anchors. And what he said about nervousness, I think, is absolutely true. And it's something I think about pretty often when I lecture and so forth. So, but just to skip ahead now, what made you decide to shift gears from being involved in TV news to going to writing books for young people?
Well, it's something that I've always wanted to do, but I didn't necessarily know how to get started or how to begin. And, then I had children of my own. And I remember specifically driving them to the library because we went to story time and all of that. We were coming home and I was saying to my firstborn, to Crowley, I was saying, you know what, honey, you can be anything you want. You can, you dream it, you can do it. And it was almost like there was like a knock at the door inside, like, hello, remember me? Because I think you have this habit of whether you're a parent or when you hit middle age of thinking, okay, I've done my thing, life is over. And of course it's ridiculous, at any point, whether it's 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, it's never too late to follow a dream. But so I just heard this dream calling of, you've always wanted to write for kids. You're telling your son to follow his dream and you're not following this one. Maybe get busy. So I did. And I went to a conference for writing for young readers in Charlotte and realized that I was standing at the bottom of Mount Everest and had a lot to learn about how to apply my craft to writing for children. But slowly, I did it. And it's been a really wonderful journey. I mean, it's challenged me in so many ways, personally, creatively, intellectually. And it's taken me to all kinds of places that I could never have imagined. So I've really enjoyed it and would encourage anyone who wants to do it. Yes, it is hard, but you too are capable of doing this.
Yeah. I like what you said in general about pursuing your dream. It's never too late. And I had a lot of different jobs in my life. I quit, let's say, quote, real job about over 20 years ago to get into lighthouses full time. And the job I have now with the U.S. Lighthouse Society, I started about 3 years ago. So I've been telling people I found my dream job at retirement age. So I feel very, very lucky, really. So it is important to go after your dream.
And sometimes you can't imagine it. In your 20s, if somebody said you're going to go into lighthouses full time, you would have been like, what does that even mean? So you can't.
It's a process.
Imagine.
Yeah. It is very much an ongoing process, and who knows where I'll end up. Maybe I'll do something totally different in the future. And same with you. You follow your heart, basically, I think.
Follow your curiosity. That has actually been the best parenting advice I've ever received is, pay attention to what your children are curious about and give them access to more of that. And that's true for grownups too. Pay attention to what you're curious about and get yourself more access to that thing.
Sounds good to me. So a little bit more about Kate Moore. You said already a bit about what drew you to her story. And lighthouse buffs, a lot of our listeners, viewers, obviously are lighthouse buffs, and they might be somewhat familiar with Kate Moore. She's one of a fairly small number of well-known women keepers, but there are some others like Ida Lewis in Newport, Rhode Island, and Kate Walker in New York, and a couple on the West Coast who are probably better known, I would say. Kate Moore, I feel, has not gotten her the attention she merits or deserves. Does that something that entered into your thinking that you wanted to bring more attention to Kate Moore? Without
question. I mean, number one, there isn't a standalone book just for her until now. And to me, it was the age at which she took over. And when I went to inspect her lighthouse journal, which is now in the sort of protected history collection of the Bridgeport Library, what was fascinating about reading her words is how matter of fact she was. So this log includes writings from keepers who came after her as well. And the other keepers are so dramatic, so dramatic. And Kate is, I mean, just the facts, man. I mean, throughout the thing. And to me, that said a lot about her level of dedication, commitment, how serious she was as a person, how serious that job was, and how courageous she was. She stayed absolutely focused on the task at hand. So I think all of that. And then also, when I was down there doing research, I learned that, and this was in 2014, the summer of 2014, when I really started going down this road. And so I went to Black Rock and Fayerweather, and that's when I learned that the children who had survived the Sandy Hook shooting had adopted her lighthouse as part of their healing. And because one of their friends who was slain, Ben Wheeler, loved lighthouses. And so they took care of Kate Moore's lighthouse because they were working under the slogan, "Helping is healing," which I thought was amazing. And so I felt like I eventually went to their school and worked with them on how to research documents and how to understand the story, and how inspiring it is to see other people who have faced difficult things, and to draw our courage from other people's examples. And there were so many highs and lows in actually writing this book, but I kept coming back to that. I want to make good on that promise to those kids, that I will deliver a book about their hero. And so that was really important to me.
Yeah. I'm really glad you brought that up, that you tied that into the Ben's Lighthouse and Newtown. Several years ago, during one of the annual Ben's Lighthouse festivals, they invited me down to speak there. And it was a great experience. They're just such wonderful people. So
a wonderful organization,
yeah,
and a wonderful mission.
Yeah.
Very moving.
Yes, very much so. And I was really happy to see you talk about that in the kind of the epilogue, the end of the book a bit. So it's a perfect tie-in. So you mentioned the research collection at the Bridgeport Public Library.
Yes.
You probably did a lot of research there with that log and other things they have there. Did you do research in other places as well?
Yes. So I did a lot of research looking at the national records as well. So things like, these old maps, so that I could look and see, because there are a couple of, I think, a couple of historic articles about her, and some of them are like outrageous, and you can't even believe it's true. And so I wanted to look at as much primary source information as possible to basically prove or disprove these articles. And really the only thing that one of them got wrong was her age. She was not like 300 years old.
Yeah, I've tried to figure that out. I think if the article you're talking about, if it was correct, she would have been something like 108 at the time of the article. Yeah.
So eventually I found her obituary and her last will and testament. So figured out that she lived to age 86. So that helped. And so I was really analyzing through Ancestry, through the online resource, all of the census records where she shows up and where her parents show up. And then looking at the payroll, the congressional records, to see what she was paid and when she finally received checks in her own name, which is in her 50s. So it was just, grasping at every shred of paper that you could find to try to piece together her story and her life. So it was a bit of a oftentimes I felt like a private detective
Hmm.
digging through all of this information. And there was in one of the articles, it said that she had, I think it was a Rembrandt in her living room, and so I was able to find the painting, which is in Europe, and to call them and find did she in fact, and she did not. It was a copy, which was quite common,
Hmm.
but just chasing all of that down was actually a very enjoyable process.
Yeah. Well, I can imagine. And I know that she was said to be, she was self-taught, but apparently very intelligent, and had a large library in her house as well as many
Yes.
paintings. So she must have been
Yes.
a very interesting person. And I know that your book pretty much concentrates on her as a young girl learning to be a lighthouse keeper, and kind of
Hmm.
skips ahead, to when she gets the actual appointment towards the end. But why did you decide to approach it that way, to make it about her as a young girl?
Because of the audience, it's for young readers, and so I want them to connect to her in such a visceral way. And so really, and this was interesting because in writing this story, it's so fascinating that she was a lighthouse keeper. It's so fascinating that she's living out on this island. Like, there were so many things that are fascinating about her. And so it took a long time for me to arrive at the heart of this story. And the heart of this story really is that at a time when women were expected to be seen sometimes and almost never heard,
Hmm.
that she was doing something so heroic in spite of that, while wearing pants, by the way. And that's the part that I want the young readers to take from this is, yes, there were these limitations and there were these expectations of who she would be because she was a girl, but she did what she wanted to do, what she had to do, what she was compelled to do anyway.
Hmm.
And that's really the message that I want them to take from her life, is having that kind of courage. Back to what we were saying about Tom Ellis, when you feel that nervousness or fear, going forward anyway.
Hmm.
And so starting with her as a young girl was important because small children reading this will relate to her immediately. They'll be able to see themselves in Kate's story and who they are.
Yeah. Well, I think your instinct was very good on that. I think it was a great decision.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, in reading the book, I noticed you use some pretty big words.
Oh,
And
yeah.
just for instance, I made a note here of a passage. She knew the lighthouse's staircase was torturous. She knew the wee hours were tedious. Now, those are not necessarily words, torturous, tedious, that you would see in a children's picture book. So I guess a two-part question: what do you see as the target age for the book? And secondly, why did you decide to use that sort of vocabulary in the book?
The target age for the book is, I think, 4 to 8. Why did I use those words? Because they are melodious and they communicate the meaning in the context of the sentence and with the illustrations. And I guess with my own children, I I try to speak as naturally as possible when I'm trying to communicate anything. And
Hmm.
I feel like for young children, a lot of times we avoid particularly descriptive words in favor of generic ones that are more commonly used. And I guess I don't subscribe to that. And luckily, my editor never said a word about it. So that's good. Yeah.
Excellent, excellent. I love it. I certainly didn't mean any sort of criticism. I think it's really
No,
good. And I
no.
think if kids are really into the story, which I think they will be, they will learn some vocabulary along with the other things they learn from it. So I applaud you for that.
I
Um,
hope so. And I
mhm.
found too that, when children are exposed to different words and a big variety of words at a young age, their capacity for using a greater variety of words increases exponentially. And so I'm hoping, fingers crossed, I'm hoping that it will inspire children to use those words and words like it to describe anything they're trying to communicate.
Hmm. It just popped into my head how when I was really small, my mother read Winnie the Pooh books to me, and those were
Hmm.
pretty advanced for a 3 or 4 year old or whatever I was. And I think that
Yeah.
really had an effect on me. It made me want to read more, and it gave me, I think, a bigger vocabulary than most little kids had.
Yes.
So I think there's a lot of truth to that. Um, Now, I want to talk a bit about the illustrations in the book. Correct me if
Yes.
I'm wrong. I think Courage Like Kate is the first time you've worked with Emily Sutton, the illustrator. Is that
It
correct?
is. It
Yeah.
is. I've been a big Emily fan for a long time. Her work is incredible, and for anyone who isn't familiar with it, the layering, the texture, the color, it's bright. It's a little bit of it has the sort of whimsy of impressionism, but the vibrancy of Matisse.
Hmm.
And I just am crazy about her work. I really am.
Yeah. I let me hold it over here. I love really love the cover. I mean, I love the illustrations in general, but I think the cover is kind of a masterpiece. I really do. It's
I
just,
think so too. And she that's hand lettering that she
hmm.
did. So
Yeah,
that's a font of her invention, and it's so cool.
right. But the everything about that cover, the composition and the color and the sort of inspiring look of it is just absolutely perfect. I saw on your blog you actually have like a conversation with Emily about developing the cover. Do you want to comment on that a little bit about how the cover came about?
Well, I not necessarily about how the cover came about, though I think she tried it a couple of different ways,
Hmm.
and I think the beam of light reaching out across the cover is just so striking
Yeah.
and really communicates the purpose of the book, the purpose of Kate's life, what she
Hmm.
was trying to do, and it feels like that light is reaching us, which I think is so cool. One of the things that was interesting is normally in the process of creating children's books, believe it or not, normally the author is over here and the illustrator is over here, and there's almost no communication.
Yeah.
In this case, that was not the case because I had collected as much visual reference material as I could for her on
Hmm.
the lighthouse itself, on what the lamps would have been like, um, the flora and fauna, what the city would have looked like during that time. We gathered there's a scene where she's going to the post office. What did the post office look like? All that kind of stuff. So she and I actually were in communication. Um, and it was really neat to see her process
Hmm.
evolve, starting from black and white sketches and just watching her add color and specifically when you see Kate had to walk on these wooden boards across a marsh to get to the lighthouse at night from the keeper's house, and
Yeah.
often the island would be flooded and there'd be 4 feet of water sloshing under her feet, which you just can imagine. And so there was some discussion back and forth of that spread of, is it dangerous enough yet? so so
Yeah.
it was interesting to sort of witness that. And Emily, interestingly enough, lives in Yorkshire in the UK. And so it was interesting to see her sort of fresh approach and the details that she picked up on about, this landscape that some of us who live in the area are used to.
Hmm.
But that she's looking at with fresh new eyes. And I think she brings that to these illustrations and really highlights life in New England in a way that is really special.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, she did just a tremendous job. And the illustrations, as I think you just said, are very vivid, very colorful. Could you say what sort of media does she use? It seems to be sort of mixed media.
A mixed
Um,
media, but she does it on, in a lot of illustrations are done digitally now,
oh,
and
okay.
hers are not.
Yeah,
She's full old school
I thought
with
so.
her work.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
which is pretty neat.
Yeah, I love the accuracy of some of all the illustrations, but the ones that show Kate tending the lamps and it shows
Hmm.
the reflectors. That's something I don't remember ever seeing in a children's book before. It's pre-Fresnel lenses in lighthouses. You had the
Yeah.
multiple, or I don't know if it's okay. Is it okay for me to show this?
Oh, absolutely. Yes,
The
please.
Kate tending the lamps with the old parabolic reflectors that were used before the
Yeah.
days of Fresnel lenses. So that's some great detail in there. I think it's great.
Well, and that was like super important to me because, and to Emily as well, because it was so intense what she had to do. And even just arriving at the front steps of the lighthouse, never mind going up the spiral steps with whale oil in the crook of your elbow. And then you get to the top of the steps and you've got to climb a ladder, a drop down ladder to get into the lantern room. I mean, we just wanted to show the reality of what she did every night.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, it's perfect. You did a great job. To shift gears a little bit, let's talk about one of your other books. Okay. You wrote a book called Rescuing the Declaration of Independence, right?
Yes.
Which has a lighthouse connection.
Yes.
Listeners who are lighthouse history buffs, as a lot of them are, will know the name Stephen Pleasanton, who's often seen as kind of a villain in lighthouse history.
Villain.
Because he was the Treasury Department official who was in charge of our lighthouses for a few decades in the first half of the 1800s, and it seemed like the main part of his job was to save money and to not build very good lighthouses because they were all about not spending much money. But he was very involved in something that you wrote that book about, which is super interesting. Could you say a little bit about what Pleasanton did, the subject of that book?
Well, I should give Kate more credit because I discovered his story while doing research about her.
Okay.
Yes. So I was at the Lighthouse Museum here in Maine, and they had a display talking about the time that Stephen Pleasanton worked for the State Department, which at that time was, right by the White House.
Yep.
And it was during the War of 1812. And in 1814, he gets a message from his boss saying the British are coming, remove the records. And the records they're talking about are the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, and all of our founding documents, George Washington's journals, congressional records, etc. And so he has to, and he is like a lowly clerk, and he has got to figure out how to pack them up, get them out of town, where to put them, and all of this stuff. So the story is about his efforts to save those documents, which was a story I had never heard before, ever. And he's got to ride them out of town on wagons, and the first attempt is not good enough. He's got to move them again in the middle of the night. But the only reason that we're able to go and see them today is because of his efforts, because his office was burned to the ground, and those documents would have either been burned with it or stolen and taken as a prize back to London.
Yeah. So maybe he's a hero after all. So that's good to hear.
Yes.
The museum you're referring to, I think, is the Maine Lighthouse Museum in Rockland. Is that correct? Yeah.
Yes.
You saw that. So I was putting a plug for them, which has the largest collection of lighthouse Fresnel lenses in the country. And if people are coming to Maine to see lighthouses, they also need to go to the Maine Lighthouse Museum in Rockland.
Well, and it's also where I was able to gather some of that visual reference material for the artist. What would boats have looked like then that she would have been using? All of those kind of details. Some of them were found there.
Okay. So I understand you do appearances at schools and libraries, right?
Yes.
What do you talk about with the kids?
It really depends on the group, but sometimes we talk about Kate Moore, and I'll read them one of the historic articles that's so outrageous, and then I'll give them a clipboard full of primary source material and say, is it true or not? And so they've got to try their hand at becoming a detective to decide and to see how these things are proven or disproven. And so it does two things. One, it shows that writing is really a contact sport. And that two, in this age of sort of what is the truth even, it actually can be nailed down. And this is how we do it. And so that's one thing that I do. And sometimes it's writing prompts or writing workshops. But it's all kind of built around encouraging and empowering students to explore their world through writing and through research.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Writing is a contact sport.
Yeah, it is. It really
I might have to
is.
steal that. I might have to steal that, but
Yeah.
yeah. So you live in Cape Elizabeth, Maine, near Portland.
Yes.
Near
Yes.
one of the most, maybe I would say the most visited lighthouse in the world, the Portland Headlight, with well over a
Yes.
million visitors a year. I don't think there's any other lighthouse that can compete with that. It's incredibly beautiful.
It's
But
so special.
it is. It's very special, and you've got a bunch of other lighthouses around there too. So it's a great location for somebody. I know you're maybe don't consider yourself a lighthouse buff or aficionado, or maybe, well, let me ask you that. Do you consider yourself a lighthouse aficionado at this point, or buff?
Yes.
Yeah.
I love them.
Mm-hmm.
I really do. And I love the stories they inspire, and the stories that, the true stories that have happened there. I just love them.
Yeah.
And so my literary agent, Amy Joan Paquette, who's also a writer within her own right and excellent. We keep saying we're going to have a writing retreat at a lighthouse and go
Mm-hmm.
find one to stay at for a few days. So that's kind of our dream to go and do that.
Well, I might be able to help with that, with recommendations for a lighthouse where you can stay if you need any help finding a good place.
Yes, we do.
So you live near Portland. Is there a certain geographic radius for your appearances where you can go?
I really go all over the place. It just
Mm-hmm.
depends on the timing of it and sort of the demands of other deadlines. But and then, of course, too, with virtual appearances, I've been able to, I was doing a virtual visit in Zurich this year in
Mm-hmm.
Switzerland. So,
Wow.
Yeah. Though if there's one coming up in Sicily, I volunteer to come in person.
Well, I think it might be a little warm there lately, but still.
Yeah.
That sounds great to me. So I saw on your website, annacrowleyredding.com, right? Do I have that
Yes,
right? annacrowleyredding.com, that you do live talks about writing on Friday afternoons.
On Clubhouse. Yes,
Clubhouse.
during the school year. I should put that in there. During
Mm-hmm.
the school year on Clubhouse. Yes.
Okay. I'm sure I should know, but I'm not personally familiar with Clubhouse.
So Clubhouse is an app, and it's basically like a digital drop-in meeting room, for lack of a better
Mm-hmm.
explanation. If you can imagine going to a conference and everyone at the conference goes off into meeting rooms to talk about a particular topic, this is sort of the digital version of that.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
it allows you to meet up with other people. For example, you can meet up with lighthouse fans from all over the world
Mm-hmm.
to talk about lighthouses.
So are you doing text chatting, or is it more like Zoom, or you're actually seeing each other? Or how does
It's
that?
kind of like a live conversation. So it's audio.
Oh, okay.
It's kind of like part podcast, part Q&A, part, whatever you want it to be. But it's a digital audio drop-in thing. So you can ask questions. It's highly interactive.
Yeah.
So it's kind of fun.
Interesting. So again, people can go to your website, annacrowleyredding.com, and read more about that, and read more about obviously your other books and your appearances and so forth. And let me ask you if you might be willing to share a little bit. I'm wondering what you're working on, and of course, I'm wondering if there's any more lighthouse projects in the pipeline.
Right now, I don't have any more lighthouse projects in the pipeline. But that's a good, interesting question to think about.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you for that. Maybe that will inspire more lighthouse books. Right now, I am working on a chapter book series called The Danger Files. And that is for upper elementary age students. And it's sort of, the first one is focused on disasters. And it's sort of this rip-roaring narrative, like take the Titanic, for example. And so you're following around a 9-year-old on the ship who really existed. and you're kind of going along in the action, except that you're getting these danger clues along the way. And they're all based on science, technology, engineering, and math, or STEM. And so you're able to kind of crunch the numbers and figure out why the situation's dangerous, what is going wrong, and why. And so it gives the reader, the young reader, some analytical information as they're reading the narrative so that they can analyze. Even before the main character knows what's going on, they have a sense of where it's headed and why. So that one is coming out, I think, in 2024. And then I'm also right now writing a young adult memoir, and that is the true story, my true story of being sent to boarding school in Italy when I was 16. And so I'm working on that right now too.
Oh, sounds great.
Yeah.
And yeah, I have one final question for you. Okay, and this one's for bonus points. All right.
Okay.
So
All right.
hope you got your number 2 pencil sharpened and ready.
Yes.
What was your favorite thing about working on Courage Like Kate?
I think my favorite thing about that, beyond digging through all the source material to kind of find her story, is that I felt connected to her throughout the whole process. And so it was kind of like having her live with you, and trying to listen to her tell me what happened. And that was a sort of a cool feeling.
I love that. I love that. And I think she was talking to you. I think that's pretty clear. Whether people see it literally or figuratively or whatever, but her voice is very much heard in the book. And again, I thank you for doing the book and congratulate you on such a beautiful book. We're actually talking on you're very welcome. What is today's date? August 9th, we're speaking on, and the book is coming out officially a week from when we're recording this, but people are going to be hearing this a little bit later, a little bit after it comes out. So it will be available by the time people hear and see this.
Absolutely. And it will also be available in an audio version as well, which is sometimes kind of fun to have the audio version too, by an amazing voice actor, Arisha Connor. And so I think that I encourage people to get the book, and I hope that they and their young readers will be inspired. I think Kate Moore was just an unbelievable person. And, it's very difficult to look back in history and write stories about women because the historical record, is just not focused on them. And so it's been really thrilling to sort of add her story, back to the record.
Yeah, well, you've done that. And Kate Moore thanks you, and all of us Lighthouse Buffs thank you. So congratulations again on the wonderful book, and thank you so much, Anna Crowley Redding, for spending this time with me today. I really do appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I loved it. I loved our conversation.
The book, Courage Like Kate, The True Story of a Girl Lighthouse Keeper, is available from Amazon and other online booksellers.
Courage Like Kate is a great addition to the list of Lighthouse-related children's books. I don't have any kids or grandkids, but I've got a pretty big collection of Lighthouse kids books, which I think is a great genre. There's a lot of good ones. Yeah. I really enjoyed talking with Anna. This is actually the second week in a row we're featuring children's book authors. We did Rhonda and David Armitage, who I interviewed in England last week. They did the book, The Lighthouse Keeper's Lunch, and a whole bunch of sequels. Their books are very different in style from Anna's, but I love them both, and I recommend both their books to our listeners and viewers. Yes. Before we end this episode, I want to mention something interesting happening in Massachusetts. I saw this in our Lighthouse News of the Week, the U.S. Lighthouse Society's Lighthouse News of the Week, and I should mention Ralph Krugler, my co-worker for the U.S. Lighthouse Society, has been doing those weekly news reports lately. And the state of Massachusetts, the state's Office of Travel and Tourism, has announced a new Massachusetts Lighthouse Trail.
That's right. The New Massachusetts Lighthouse Trail stretches from Cape Ann and down the North Shore to Boston Harbor and the South Shore and out to Cape Cod and the islands of Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket.
And you can download a PDF of the Massachusetts Lighthouse Trail Guide at visitma.com/lighthouse trail. That's visitma.com/lighthouse trail. So, Michelle, this is the part of the podcast where we usually tell our listeners to be sure to check out everything the U.S. Lighthouse Society has to offer at uslhs.org. Today, I just want to add a little bit kind of on a personal level. As I mentioned earlier, I just returned from the U.S. Lighthouse Society's 23-day tour. They called it the Ultimate Ireland Tour. It was fantastic. We saw, I'm not even sure the number of lighthouses. I know it was over 50. Some of them distant, but a lot of them up close and personal. A lot, and also lots of other stuff, castles and all kinds of beautiful scenery. Ireland is so beautiful.
Amazing.
Yeah,
Amazing.
they're not kidding when they say there's something like 40 shades of green in Ireland. I think there's a lot more than that. It's just so green and so pretty. A few years ago, I took part in the society's tour in the southeastern Scotland and down the east coast of England. That was also fantastic. Sometimes I help run some of the domestic tours. I'll be co-running a tour in northern Maine this October. It starts October 8th. And I'll be co-running one in northern Lake Michigan next summer. All the info on the tours is at uslhs.org. Just click on tours. I hope our listeners and viewers will check out those tours because, as you know, Michelle, lighthouses are beautiful. I don't need to tell people that, but also they kind of open a window or maybe a door to all kinds of beautiful places and to learning about all kinds of history.
They absolutely do. And even being at Portsmouth Harbor Light every week, I still feel like I'm learning something new about the history of the lighthouse or the keepers. And
Mm-hmm.
every time I go, see a new lighthouse, there's always something new to learn. So
Yeah, absolutely. And at Portsmouth Harbor Light, like a lot of lighthouses, we're just completely surrounded by history. You look around there, there's the forts and other lighthouses and the Isles of Shoals, interesting group of islands. The city of Portsmouth has, and the fort right next to us, Fort Constitution. There's so much history there. And so the lighthouses are kind of a window into all of that, but they're also just beautiful, fun places to visit.
So if you're listening to this podcast today, please share word of this podcast on social media and with your friends. The more listeners we get, the better. If you listen with Apple Podcasts, please rate and review us.
Absolutely. So, Michelle, do you have a quote today?
I do, Jeremy. The poet and artist Susie Kassem once wrote, quote, "Never stop wandering into wonder," end quote. I really like that quote. It's beautiful.
Yeah, I love that quote too. So on next week's episode of Lighthearted, we're going to listen to a conversation with Ben Trask. He's a historian who's writing a new book on the lighthouses of southeastern Virginia. And there's some very interesting aspects to that, African-American keepers and other interesting topics. So I want to mention something before we close. We, meaning Friends of Portsmouth Harbor Lighthouses, the organization that you and I are very involved with here in New Hampshire, Michelle, we're holding a 5 lighthouse cruise on September 24th. And that's one of our big fundraisers of the year. We did 2 sunset cruises in June with Granite State Whale Watch out of Rye, New Hampshire. And we're doing this 5 lighthouse cruise on September 24th. 8:30 a.m. to 1 p.m. All the information is on our website, portsmouthharborlighthouse.org. It's always a good time, and we do a raffle on board and have a lot of fun. So
great cruise.
Yeah, and always great working with Granite State Whale Watch. They're an excellent company. So I hope we'll see some of our listeners on there. So at this point, as always, to our regular listeners and to our new ones, thank you so much for listening, and
keep a good light.
Out in the dark, I'm gonna let it shine. Out in the dark, I'm gonna let it shine. Out in the dark, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine.